Hood cologne and government charity. That's what broke smells like. Sergeant Dale Briggs said it loud enough for his partner to hear, loud enough for the man behind the wheel to hear, loud enough that it carried across the hot, still air of the Interstate 44's shoulder like something he'd practiced because he'd said versions of it 100 times before, and nobody had ever made him stop. The man behind the wheel was Raymond Cole, 54 years old, hands resting flat on top of the steering wheel before Briggs even reached the window, both hands visible, deliberate, the kind of positioning a black man in America learns early and never fully unlearns, no matter how many degrees he earns or how many years he spends inside the system that keeps pulling him back to this exact moment on the side of an empty highway with the sun beating down and a badge leaning into his window like it owns the air he breathes. Raymond was driving a dark green Chevy Tahoe government plates, clean and unremarkable jazz, playing low on the stereo, a plain gray polo shirt, khaki pants, no tie, no briefcase, just a man who wanted one quiet afternoon on the road before everything in his life changed permanently, starting Monday morning. Briggs didn't look at the plates long. He looked at Raymond, and that was enough for him. Dark skin, out-of-state registration, nice car on a flat stretch of southern interstate where Briggs had been shopping for exactly this combination for 16 years running. He found the envelope in the center console during the search he ordered without legal cause and conducted without apology. A plain white envelope, $2,200 in cash, clean and flat. He fanned the bills slowly, the way a man fans a hand of cards he already knows he's going to play. And he smiled at his partner, Kyle Mercer, with the particular satisfaction of someone winning a private game that only he knew the rules to. He told Raymond to get out of the vehicle and sit on the shoulder, on the gravel, in 97-degree heat, while trucks blew past at 75 miles an hour and kicked dust into his face. Raymond sat down without a word, hands on his knees, spine straight, eyes level, and said absolutely nothing. His phone buzzed in his shirt pocket. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. Briggs glanced at it, waved a hand like it was a fly, and turned away to make his own call, laughing into it, saying another one, easy $2,000, while Raymond Cole sat on hot gravel and listened to every single word. Harmon County sits along a stretch of Interstate 44 in the rural South that most people only ever see as a blur through a windshield, flat fields. On both sides, a water tower with the county name in faded blue paint, a grain elevator that's been rusting since the 80s, one stoplight downtown, a Dollar General, a chicken processing plant on the east side that employs about 400 people, and 60 miles of open highway where the Harmon County Sheriff's Office runs everything without much interference from anyone above or below. Population 14,000. Median household income $28,000. 23 sworn deputies on the payroll, and out of those 23, one name came up in nearly every conversation that ever happened in the county about the highway unit, about seizures, about money, about the way things worked out there on the interstate when the lights came on behind you and nobody else was around. Sergeant Dale Briggs, 16-year veteran, head of the 3-man highway interdiction unit. Platinum blonde, buzz cut going gray at the temples, badge worn on his chest like a family crest, boots that were never quiet on any floor he walked across. The county newspaper had run a headline on him 5 times in the past decade. Harmon County Deputy leads state in highway seizures, always with a photo of him shaking Sheriff Roy Tatum's hand at a budget meeting, big smile chest. Out the picture of a man who believed completely in himself and had never once been given a reason to stop. On paper, Dale Briggs was the best thing that ever happened to Harmon County law enforcement, and the county treated him accordingly. His seizure numbers climbed every year. The department loved him. Tatum commended him personally at every budget cycle. The interdiction unit's funding went up because the unit kept producing, and the unit kept producing because Briggs kept working his stretch of highway the way a man works a vending machine when he knows which buttons to press. What the newspaper never printed was this: almost every seizure Briggs made was cash, not drugs, not weapons, not contraband of any kind. Just cash taken from drivers during traffic stops on a theory of suspicion that had nothing to do with evidence and everything to do with what the driver looked like, and the people he took it from were almost never charged with a crime. The money simply moved through the civil forfeiture system and disappeared, and if you wanted it back, you filed a claim with the county and waited, and almost certainly got a denial letter and nothing else. Reverend Elwood Grant had known this for 4 years. He was the pastor of a small Baptist church 6 miles off the interstate, and for 4 years he had kept a composition notebook under his pulpit, writing down every name that came through his congregation with the same story pulled over, searched cash, taken no charges, no receipt, no way to fight it. Blue ink, careful handwriting, dates and dollar amounts, and the names of people who had stopped believing the system would ever look their way. He had sent that notebook's contents in the form of detailed letters to the county commission, to Sheriff Tatum, to the state oversight board, to anyone whose address he could find. Every letter came back stamped, received. That was it, just received. No investigation, no follow-up, no phone call, no acknowledgement that the names he had written down were real people who had lost real money to a real sergeant who was still out there on the highway right now, lights flashing, doing it again. The notebook sat under his pulpit with a worn spine and a cover stained by 4 years of morning coffee, and the names inside it kept multiplying, and nobody came. What you need to understand about Raymond Cole before any of this makes the kind of sense it needs to make is that he chose to drive that day. And that choice was not careless or accidental. It was deliberate and personal in a way that only he fully understood. He could have taken a government vehicle with a driver. He could have flown. He could have had a 3-car motorcade meet him at the airport and deliver him directly to his front door, because starting Monday morning, that was going to be his life. And the people responsible for planning his schedule had already tried to give him exactly that. He said no to all of it. He told his wife Evelyn the night before he left, standing in their kitchen while she folded dish towels, that he wanted one last quiet afternoon on the road before everything changed, that he wanted to see the country from the ground level, from a gas station and a 2-lane connector and a long, flat stretch of interstate where the sky goes all the way to the edge of the earth, because he had grown up watching his father do exactly that drive. Federal highways in a mail truck for 33 years, and something about the road still felt like the most honest version of the country he had spent his entire career trying to protect. He had the envelope in the center console because he was planning to stop in a town outside the capital to pick up a piece of furniture from a private seller, a cedar chest of drawers that had belonged to his late mother's neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Pauline who had passed the previous winter, whose family was selling her things, and who had once told Raymond when he was 11 years old that he had the kind of hands that were built for careful work. He had thought about that chest of drawers for months. He finally had time to go get it. So it was a gray polo shirt and khakis jazz on the stereo at low volume $2,200 in a plain envelope, and 60 miles of open highway on a Tuesday afternoon in June, the last quiet day before the rest of his life began, in a building with his name on the directory. He had driven this stretch of road before years earlier when he was a young agent working out of a field office 2 states over. He knew what a cruiser parked in the highway median meant. He knew what the lights coming on behind him meant. He knew what it meant when a black man on a southern interstate got pulled over for 1 mile over the speed limit in a car that was too clean and going somewhere the officer had already decided he had no right to go. He signaled right immediately, decelerated smoothly, pulled onto the shoulder without any drama or hesitation, the kind of stop a man makes when he has done absolutely nothing wrong and has learned over 54 years that it will not matter. Both hands on the wheel before Briggs's door even opened. He looked straight ahead and he waited, and the last thing he felt before the window came down was not fear. It was the specific bone-deep exhaustion of recognition of having been here before in 100 different forms on 100 different days, and knowing that the only armor that had ever worked was stillness. Briggs ran the plates before he walked back to the window the way he always did, sitting in his cruiser with the AC blowing and the radio on low, while the driver on the shoulder sweated and waited and wondered how long this was going to take, because that waiting was part of it. That was the point of it. The slow, deliberate walk, the full minute in the cruiser, the 2 knuckles tapped on the taillight on the way past. All of it was performance. All of it was designed to communicate one thing before a single word was spoken: I own this stretch of road, and you are on it at my pleasure. The screen returned the plates clearly and without ambiguity: United States Department of Justice Fleet Vehicle Assignment. Briggs read it. He sat with it for 2 full seconds, the kind of pause that later, when investigators reviewed the dashcam footage frame by frame, would be described as the moment the stop became a choice rather than a reflex. He read it, understood it, and walk back to the window anyway, because in 16 years, nobody had ever made him account for what he did out here. And a government plate on a car driven by a black man on Interstate 44 was not in Briggs's internal geography, something that required him to recalibrate anything. Step out of the vehicle. Raymond complied slowly, both hands rising first visible the entire way out of the car, and he stood on the shoulder gravel with his arms slightly away from his body and his face carrying nothing that Briggs could use. No anger, no fear, no pleading, no aggression, just a kind of composed attentiveness that Briggs read as arrogance, and that was in fact something else entirely. Kyle Mercer patted Raymond down and found nothing. No weapons, no contraband, his hands running a professional path across a body that carried none of the things Briggs had already mentally assigned to it. And Mercer's hands were not entirely steady, and he did not look at Raymond's face while he worked, and when he stepped back, he did not step toward Briggs, but slightly away from both of them, like a man trying to occupy a piece of geography that didn't exist. Briggs ordered the vehicle searched. Mercer opened the center console and found the envelope, held it up with the particular reluctance of someone who already knew what came next and had chosen not to stop it. Briggs took the envelope, fanned the bills, smiled. Then he told Raymond to sit down on the shoulder, not in the cruiser, not on the bumper, on the gravel on the side of Interstate 44 in 97 degrees of direct June sun with no shade for a quarter mile in either direction. Raymond sat down, and the gravel was sharp through the thin fabric of his khakis, biting into the backs of his thighs, and the asphalt 6 inches from his left hand was hot enough to raise a blister if he held his palm against it, and the semis that blew past at 75 miles an hour pulled the air sideways each time and threw fine gray dust across his forearms and into his face, and the smell was tire rubber and dry grass and hot tar baking in the sun. And Raymond Cole, 54 years old, Georgetown Law, 28 years in federal service, sat with his hands on his knees and his back straight and looked at the middle distance with the focused stillness of someone who was not just enduring this moment, but memorizing it, the angle of Mercer's body cam, the position of Briggs's dash cam, the direction of the light. Briggs stood 10 feet away and made a phone call, not even trying to be quiet. Laughing into the receiver, his voice carrying perfectly across the shoulder gravel, another one easy, $2 grand, not hushed, not coded, just said the way a man says something in a place where he has never once worried about being overheard by anyone who could do anything about it. Raymond did not move. His phone buzzed in his shirt pocket once, twice, 7 times, and Briggs glanced at it each time with the mild annoyance of a man being interrupted during something pleasant. Popular guy. Briggs said. Raymond looked up at him just once and said 4 words in the flattest possible voice, the kind of voice that carries no heat, because it doesn't need any. You should answer that. Briggs didn't answer it. 40 feet away, a minivan slowed as it passed the stop. A black woman in her 50s at the wheel, 2 kids in the back, and she saw Raymond on the gravel and saw the badge, and her face did the thing that faces do in those moments, tightening around the eyes with a recognition that has no language because it doesn't need one, and she did not stop because stopping would not have helped Raymond and might have made things worse, and she knew that, and she drove on, and she would think about that moment for a long time afterward. Kyle Mercer had been on the interdiction unit for 18 months, and he had told himself for most of those 18 months that what he was doing was legal, that Briggs was a senior officer with 16 years of highway experience, who knew patterns that a younger deputy couldn't see yet, that the stops were defensible, and the seizures were within the law, and the fact that nearly every driver they pulled over looked the same was just as Briggs put it, the reality of the highway. The statistical truth of who carries cash and why on this particular stretch of Interstate 44 in the rural American South. Briggs had recruited him personally, framed the interdiction unit as the fast track, told him most deputies spent their whole careers writing fender benders and domestics, while the highway unit was doing real work, real numbers, the kind of record that got you promoted. Mercer had transferred from traffic patrol in under a year. He had wanted to believe that meant he was good at something. The training was unwritten, spoken casually in the cruiser between stops, offered as wisdom from a man who had been doing this since before Mercer got his badge. Dark skin and out-of-state plates. That's your combination. If the car's too nice, pull it. If the car's too beat up, pull it. There's always cash, always. and Mercer had filed those words in the part of his mind where he kept things he had chosen not to examine too directly, because examining them would have required a response he wasn't ready to give. During this stop, something was different. He had noticed it the moment Raymond stepped out of the Tahoe, that particular quality of stillness, the hands not raised in fear, but held visible as a matter of long practice, the spine straight, the face carrying nothing except a calm and total attentiveness that had nothing to do with guilt, and everything to do with a man who had been navigating moments like this for decades, and had developed a specific kind of endurance for them. It was not the stillness of a man who had something to hide. It was the stillness of a man who understood exactly what was happening and had chosen documentation over reaction. When Mercer ran back to his cruiser during the initial license check, he saw the DOJ fleet registration on his own screen, and he stayed with it longer than he should have, reading it twice, and something in his chest moved in a way that didn't feel like doubt, so much as the sensation of a door opening onto a room he had been successfully not looking at for 18 months. He patted Raymond down and found nothing, and when he stepped back, he stepped away from Briggs rather than toward him. And when Briggs made the call and said another one, Mercer's hand moved to his radio and stopped, and his jaw worked with the particular rhythm of a man swallowing something that wouldn't go down smoothly, no matter how many times he tried. He watched Raymond sit on the gravel with perfect composure, straight-backed hands on knees, not performing dignity, but simply having it. And Mercer stood apart in the heat and felt for the first real time in 18 months something he could only name as shame. Not the performative kind, not the kind you put on for a mirror, but the kind that lives behind the sternum and changes the air in your lungs every time you breathe. Near the end of the stop, Raymond looked up, not at Briggs, but at Mercer, and for 1/2 second their eyes met Raymond's gaze, steady and clear, and without accusation, simply meeting his. And Mercer looked away first, and he knew that Raymond had noticed, and he knew that Raymond would remember. Briggs wrote the citation standing beside his cruiser, unhurried the pen moving across the forms, with the fluency of a man who has filled out the same paperwork hundreds of times and has never once worried about what happens to it afterward. 1 mile over the speed limit, cash seized under civil forfeiture, no charges filed, no arrests, made no evidence. Required beyond the presence of money in a car, driven by a black man on a highway, where Dale Briggs had been the law for 16 years, without anyone successfully arguing otherwise. He walked back to Raymond and handed him the paperwork, the way you hand someone a parking ticket, with an air of mild bureaucratic finality, and he leaned down slightly to make a comment that was quiet enough to be deniable and loud enough to be unmistakable. Something about carrying money you can't explain, making people wonder something about having a safe drive, and then he straightened up and walked back to his cruiser without looking back, already moving on in his mind to the next southbound lane, the next combination of skin and plates, and an envelope sitting somewhere in a center console. Raymond took the receipt without looking at it, folded it, once creased it precisely, and placed it in his shirt pocket next to his phone. He sat in the Tahoe for 3 minutes, exactly not slamming the steering wheel, not running through the stop out loud in the car the way anger tells you to, not accelerating away with the particular fury of a man who has just been robbed by a badge and knows there is nowhere to file that knowledge, just sitting hands in his lap, looking at the flat line of the interstate ahead of him, where Briggs's cruiser had already disappeared back into the median. Then he picked up his phone. 11 missed calls, all from the same Washington area code, all from the same number he had seen on his screen 100 times in the last 2 weeks as his confirmation moved through the Senate, and his life rearranged itself around a new weight and a new responsibility and a new name on a new directory in a building he had been working toward for 28 years. He dialed back. The call lasted 70 seconds. No one who was not on that call knows exactly what was said, because Raymond Cole is not a man who performs his anger for an audience, and whatever he felt on that gravel shoulder, he had already decided would be channeled into something more durable than shouting. What is known is what happened immediately after he hung up. Within 40 minutes, 2 black Suburbans with federal plates were doing 95 miles an hour toward Harmon County on the same stretch of Interstate 44, where Dale Briggs had just had what he would later describe to his union representative as a perfectly routine stop. Briggs at that specific moment was already back in his median spot radar gun aimed at southbound traffic. Coffee in the cup holder, humming something low and tuneless to himself, the way a man hums when he is comfortable and unconcerned and has not yet felt the ground shift underneath his feet. He had no idea that the last 16 years of his professional life were already beginning to collapse inward from a direction he had never once thought to watch. He was shopping for the next stop. He didn't know this one had already cost him everything. The briefing document that Captain Vera Okafor read 2 days after the stop was 41 pages, and she read it once through without stopping. And when she finished, she set it flat on the courthouse table and sat with it for a long moment, in the way that a person sits with information that is not surprising and is still somehow stunning. Raymond Cole was born in Meridian, Mississippi, the eldest child of Walter Cole, who drove a United States Postal Service mail truck for 33 years on the same rural route without ever missing a scheduled delivery, and Diane Cole, who taught second grade at a public elementary school for 26 years and who believed with the specific and undefeated conviction of a woman who had watched generations of children learn to read that education was the one door that opened every other door. They raised Raymond and his younger sister Cheryl in a 3-bedroom house on a street where everybody knew everybody's first name and nobody had a great deal, but nobody went without the essentials, and Raymond was the first person in his family to attend college. Full scholarship to Morehouse, graduated with honors, and then Georgetown Law, where he finished in the top 8% of his class and was recruited by 3 of the largest firms in the country, any of which would have made him wealthy and comfortable and entirely removed from the kind of work he ultimately chose. He chose the DOJ instead. 28 years in federal service, starting as a field agent in the Civil Rights Division in Atlanta, then organized crime in Chicago, then the Public Corruption Unit, which is the unit that investigates what happens when the people trusted with the law decide to use it as a weapon against the people they were supposed to protect. He built a reputation over those 28 years for being the quietest person in any room, and consistently the most dangerous to anyone in that room who had something to hide, because he read every document twice and remembered every word and never confused moving quickly with moving right. 3 weeks before the stop, the President of the United States announced his nomination as Deputy Attorney General, the second highest law enforcement official in the country, the person whose office oversees every federal prosecutor in every district in every state. The Senate confirmed him 5 days later, and the vote was not particularly close because Raymond Cole's record was not particularly ambiguous. He chose to drive the day before his first official week because he had told Evelyn the night before that he wanted one last quiet afternoon before everything changed permanently, and because somewhere in the part of him that still remembered his father's mail truck and those long, flat southern roads, the highway felt like the most honest place he knew to be, just a man for a few more hours. He got that. In the worst possible way, he got exactly what he asked for: one last experience of being just a man on a southern highway with no title behind his name and no protection from what happens to black men on southern highways when the wrong badge decides they're in the wrong place. The man whose career was built on dismantling institutions that preyed on ordinary people had just experienced that preying firsthand in real time on camera in 97-degree heat, with gravel biting through his khakis and a sergeant laughing 10 feet away about how easy the money was. And he had sat through every second of it without breaking, because he had learned over 54 years that the most powerful thing a person can do in a moment that is designed to diminish them is to refuse completely and without spectacle to be diminished. Sheriff Roy Tatum learned who Raymond Cole was at 4:47 in the afternoon via a call to his personal cell from the state attorney general's office, and the call lasted 6 minutes. And by the end of it, the pulled pork sandwich on his desk had gone cold, and Roy Tatum's face had done something that his secretary standing in the doorway when it happened would later describe as going from red to white in the time it takes to understand what you've done and realize there is no version of the next few days that ends well for you. He called Briggs immediately, told him to get back to the station, not to stop anywhere, not to talk to anyone. Briggs on the other end sounded mildly inconvenienced, the voice of a man being called in from recess, asking if he could just finish the stop he was already running. Tatum said no. His voice, by the account of the deputy who overheard the call from 2 desks away, had a quality it had never had in 16 years of working with Briggs, a kind of flat, stripped-down authority that had nothing performative in it, the voice of a man who has finally run out of road. Briggs drove back to the station, finishing his coffee radio on unhurried. He still didn't know. He walked in through the side entrance the way he always did, boots loud on the tile, turned the corner of the main hallway, and stopped. 3 people in dark suits were standing outside the briefing room. They were not Harmon County. They were not state police. The woman in the center stepped forward before he could decide how to hold his face. Sergeant Briggs. Yeah. Who's asking? She held up federal credentials and told him her name. This is about a traffic stop you conducted approximately 2 hours ago on a vehicle registered to the United States Department of Justice. The arms that had been crossed, uncrossed. It was a small movement, but everyone in the hallway caught it, the way a room catches the first tremor before anyone says the word earthquake. Briggs' eyes did the mental arithmetic that faces do when a man who has been operating without consequences for 16 years suddenly realizes he may be looking at his first one, and you could see the calculation happening. How much trouble is this? How do I play this? Whose phone do I call first? I conduct a lot of stops, he said, and his voice still had some of its usual performance in it, the practiced drawl of a man who has talked his way out of everything. You're going to have to be more specific. The driver's name was Raymond Cole. She paused for exactly 1 second. Mr. Cole is the newly confirmed Deputy Attorney General of the United States. The hallway went genuinely quiet. The deputy at the far desk stopped typing. A door that had been swinging closed stopped at half-mast as the person holding it forgot to let go. Briggs's jaw tightened. His arms did not recross. His face went through 2 colors in the space of a breath, and when it settled, it was the face of a man looking at something he cannot make disappear by staring at it harder. He asked for his union representative. He was told that was his right, but that before he made that call, all body cam footage, all dash cam recordings, and his complete activity logs for the past 14 months were already flagged for federal review. Tatum appeared in the doorway at the far end of the hall, still pale, still shaken. He looked at Briggs for a moment and said the only honest thing he'd said in connection with this unit in 16 years, give them everything. Briggs stood in the hallway alone after that union rep not yet arrived, the seized envelope sitting in an evidence bag on a desk 20 feet away, the DOJ plates visible through the window on the Tahoe still parked in the lot, and the full weight of what he had chosen to do when he saw those plates on his screen and walked back to the window anyway, beginning slowly and irrevocably to land. Captain Vera Okafor arrived in Harmon County on a Thursday morning, 2 days after the stop, drove herself in an unmarked state police sedan, carried a single briefcase, and brought 4 investigators who set up in the back room of the county courthouse with laptops and legal pads and the kind of focused, methodical silence that tends to make guilty people very uncomfortable when they walk past closed doors. Okafor had been in internal affairs for 9 years, which meant she had spent 9 years sitting across tables from people who had used their badges to hurt the people those badges were supposed to protect, and she had never once grandstanded or leaked to reporters or treated the work as anything other than what it was. The slow, careful assembly of the truth from whatever pieces the institution had tried to bury, and then the placing of that truth somewhere it could not be ignored. She requested every piece of footage the interdiction unit had generated in the past 14 months, dash cam, body cam, in-car audio, and her team began reviewing it. Not the summaries, not the incident reports, the actual video, 8 hours a day on those legal pads, because the summaries were written by Briggs, and the summaries were useless. But the video was the video, and the video did not know how to lie. What they found in 340 stops was not subtle and was not ambiguous and was not the kind of thing that required a statistician to explain. It was a pattern so consistent and so undisguised that it read less like a secret and more like a practice that had simply never been examined the way a building can have a structural problem for decades because no one has ever looked at the foundation from the right angle. Of 340 stops, 267 involve Black or Latino drivers in a county where Black and Latino residents made up 29% of the population. Of the 73 stops involving white drivers, 4 resulted in vehicle searches. Of the 267 stops involving Black or Latino drivers, 201 resulted in full searches. 47 of those searches produced cash seizures, a total of $189,000 across 14 months. Roughly 1 seizure per week, and the drugs seized in that same period totaled 0. The weapons totaled 0, and the number of charges that resulted in an actual conviction was 0. Then the forensic accountants found the missing $38,000 seized funds that never reached the county general fund, matched to a series of cash deposits in Briggs's personal bank account. Small amounts, always under the federal reporting threshold, spread across the same 14-month window with the regularity of a man who had been doing this long enough to know exactly where the lines were and exactly how to stay just beneath them. Briggs was not just enforcing a corrupt practice, he was stealing from the people he had already stolen from. Okafor stared at the number on the table for a long time, and then she picked up the phone and called the FBI field office and said in the same flat, contained voice she used for everything, "This is bigger than one stop. This is a pattern, and it goes back years." Reverend Elwood Grant's ledger produced 17 names who agreed to give formal statements to Okafor's team, and every one of those statements was taken in the same back room of the same courthouse where Grant's letters had sat for 4 years, stamped, received, and nothing else, which meant the building itself had heard all of this before and chosen silence, and now it was hearing it again under different circumstances with different people at the table, and the weight of that difference was not lost on anyone who had been in both rooms. 3 of those names had come to define what Briggs had built on that highway, not because their cases were the most extreme, but because they were the most ordinary, which was the point, which was what made them devastating. Loretta Sims was 47 years old, a registered nurse who had just finished a 12-hour overnight shift when Briggs pulled her over for an unclear lane change she did not remember making, searched her car over her explicit refusal, and found $1,600 in cash she had withdrawn that morning to pay her mother's assisted living facility 2 towns over. She had the bank receipt in the same envelope with the bills, and she showed it to Briggs, and Briggs looked at it and told her that if the money was really hers, she could file a claim with the county. She filed. She waited 4 months. The county denied her claim in a letter so impersonal, it looked like a form document, which it was. In her statement to Okafor, Loretta did not cry, did not raise her voice, just described the whole sequence in the particular tone of a woman who had expected nothing from the system and had received exactly that. And what was most devastating about her testimony was not its anger, but its absence of surprise. Arthur Webb was 61 years old, a retired postal worker who had sold his fishing boat for $3,400 cash that morning. Legitimate sale buyer paid in hundreds. Arthur had the signed bill of sale in his glove box, and Briggs took every bill and told him that carrying that much cash was consistent with narcotics sales activity. Arthur had never been arrested in his life. He had delivered mail on the same federal route for 31 years without missing a single scheduled delivery, the same way his son Raymond's father had done it for 33 years, 3 counties over, though neither man knew the other existed. In his statement, Arthur said only, "I drove mail for 31 years and never once took a thing that wasn't mine." Darnell Price was 22 years old, a junior at the state university, and the $720 Briggs took from him was money he had earned over a summer of landscaping work and set aside for fall textbooks. Briggs told him college boys didn't carry cash like that unless they were moving something. Darnell lost a semester because he couldn't afford his books. He almost didn't go back. It took him 2 years to tell anyone what had happened, because for 2 years he had carried it as a private shame, the way people carry things that should belong to the person who did them, but somehow end up on the person they were done to. Okafor called Kyle Mercer in on the 4th day of the investigation, and she gave him the choice directly without preamble or theater, the way she gave everyone the choice, because she had found over 9 years in internal affairs that clarity was more effective than pressure, and that most people, when given a simple, honest picture of their options, made the right decision faster than they expected to. Witness or co-conspirator, full cooperation or full investigation, federal territory civil rights violations under color of law. She told him she had the footage of every stop he had participated in and that the footage was not ambiguous. And she watched his face do the thing she had seen dozens of faces do in that room, the particular collapse of the calculation that has been running in the background of a person's life for a long time when it finally meets a number it cannot argue with. He broke in under 5 minutes, which was not the fastest she had seen, but was faster than she expected from someone who had managed to hold it together for 18 months on that unit. And what came out of him over the next 2 hours was the kind of testimony that doesn't just end one career, it illuminates the full architecture of how a career like Briggs's gets built and sustained in the first place. Briggs kept a personal tally inside a manila folder in his cruiser, every seizure, every dollar amount, and he compared the monthly totals, the way a salesman compares quarterly numbers, pushing harder when the figures dipped, easing off when they climbed, treating the whole operation like a performance metric with a bonus structure that was never written down anywhere. After a seizure, Briggs would get back in the cruiser and say the same thing every time, same words, same laugh. They never come back for it. Who's going to believe them? Mercer had heard it 40 times. When Mercer asked early in his time on the unit about a stop that had felt wrong, Briggs told him the sheriff had signed off on everything, that if Mercer had a problem with the way the unit worked, he could find another department, and good luck getting a reference. Mercer resigned the week before sentencing. In the single brief interview he gave afterward, he said, "I should have said something the first time I saw it. I didn't. That's mine to carry." He enrolled in a criminal justice reform program at the state university that fall and did not ask for anything in return for his testimony, which Okafor noted in her final report as the one detail she found genuinely hopeful. The recorded interview with Dale Briggs took place on a Friday morning in a room at the county courthouse that had no windows, a table bolted to the floor, and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look tired, regardless of whether they were. Which in this case was appropriate, because everyone in the room was in fact tired of this particular story and the particular way it kept refusing to stay buried. Briggs arrived in civilian clothes, dark shirt, no badge, and sat down across from Okafor and 2 federal agents with the practiced composure of a man who has been coached by a union lawyer to show nothing and volunteer nothing, and he held that composure reasonably well for the first 20 minutes, while Okafor laid out the numbers, the racial breakdown, the seizure-to-conviction ratio, the pattern of stops across 14 months, in the same methodical, unperformed voice she used for everything, because she had found over 9 years that the absence of drama is often the most effective delivery system for facts that speak loudly enough on their own. Briggs's answer to the racial disparity was the answer she had expected. He stopped suspicious vehicles, and if those vehicles happened to be driven by certain people, that was simply what the highway looked like. That was the statistical reality of interstate interdiction, that every stop he made was conducted lawfully within department guidelines, and that the numbers reflected the highway, not the officer. She asked about the personal bank deposits. His lawyer intervened. She opened a folder and placed a photograph on the table. "Do you remember Loretta Sims?" Briggs said he didn't recall the specific stop. She placed Loretta's photo face up between them, a woman in scrubs, hospital ID still clipped to her collar, taken at her workplace. She left it there. Arthur Webb. Same answer. Arthur's photo went on the table, a man in a postal service jacket, square-shouldered, standing in front of the truck he drove for 31 years. Darnell Price. Same answer. Darnell's photo joined the others, a young man outside a university building, backpack over one shoulder, the specific brightness of someone who had worked very hard to be somewhere and was glad to be there. 3 photographs on the table. Briggs looked at none of them directly, which was its own answer. Then Okafor took a 4th photograph from the folder and placed it at the center of the table. And she said the name, and she said the title, and she said it in the same flat, steady voice she had used for everything else in that room. Briggs went silent. Okafor counted the seconds without making it visible, 9 of them, which was 4 more than she usually got. When he spoke, his voice had shed most of its performance, and what remained was a dull, reduced quality, the voice of a man who has been playing a long game and has finally looked up and realized the board has been cleared around him while he wasn't watching. "That doesn't change what I saw on that highway," he said. Okafor closed her folder, straightened the edge against the table, looked at him for exactly as long as necessary. "No," she said, "but it changes everything that happens next." His lawyer leaned in before the sentence had fully settled in the air. One word, quiet, definitive plea. The courtroom was full before the session was called to order, and the fullness of it was not the fullness of spectacle, but of witness people who had come not to watch something happen, but to be present for the formal acknowledgement of something that had already happened to them or to people they loved on a highway where nobody had come for a long time. Reverend Elwood Grant sat in the second row with the composition notebook in his lap, the one with the worn spine and the coffee-stained cover, and 4 years of names written in blue ink on the pages inside. He held it with both hands, not open, just held the way you hold something that has been waiting a long time to have done the thing it was made for. Loretta Sims sat one row behind him, hands folded, dressed in the same navy blue she wore to funerals and graduations and the other occasions that required a person to be fully present for something that mattered. Arthur Webb was in the back row, arms crossed the Postal Service jacket across his knees, even in the summer heat, because he had worn it to work every day for 31 years, and it was the thing he trusted to mark the days that were important. Darnell Price had driven 3 hours from campus and arrived early enough to get a seat near the center, and he sat with the particular stillness of a young man who has finally run out of reasons to feel ashamed of something that was never his fault. The 6 federal counts were read aloud, and the guilty plea to the reduced charges was entered, and Briggs stood with his hands clasped in front of him and said nothing, because his lawyer had advised against a statement, and because there was nothing in the end that the words available to him could have done with the photographs on that table. The judge spoke directly to Briggs, and her voice was not theatrical and not punishing in its tone, but simply clear the way. A sentence is clear when it is built from facts rather than opinion. He had been entrusted with the authority of the state, and he had used that authority not to protect the public, but to prey upon them. And he had targeted citizens based on the color of their skin, and he had taken their money, and he had humiliated them on the side of highways in the rural South. And he had done it because he believed correctly for 16 years that no one with the power to stop him would ever choose to use it. She paused for a moment. That was not dramatic, but was very deliberate. Someone stopped him. 54 months in federal prison. Permanent revocation of law enforcement certification. Full restitution $189,000 to be distributed to every identified victim in the case. Sheriff Roy Tatum resigned by noon that same day, a one-line letter, no apology, empty desk. The county commission appointed an interim sheriff from outside the department, a woman named Daphne Osei, a 20-year law enforcement veteran, the first black woman to hold that office in Harmon County's history. The commission also launched a formal review of every civil forfeiture case filed in the county over the past 16 years. In the hallway afterward, Reverend Grant stood alone for a moment with the notebook open to the first page, the first name he had written down 4 years ago, the first person who had come to him with nothing left but the story and nowhere to tell it. He ran his thumb slowly down the column of names. Then he closed the notebook and held it at his side and walked out into the afternoon light. Raymond Cole walked into the Department of Justice building on Monday morning in a suit and polished shoes, his name freshly printed on the directory in the main lobby, staff lining the hallway from the entrance to his office, agents he had worked alongside for 2 decades, new recruits who had only seen his face in confirmation hearing footage, administrative staff who had prepared his office and his first day's briefings and who now stood in the hallway simply to be present, because sometimes showing up is the only statement that means anything. He did not give a speech. He did not reference the stop, did not say Briggs's name, did not stand at a podium and perform the kind of public reckoning that turns a private injury into a career narrative. He walked the length of that hallway, the way his father had walked his mail route, steadily without fanfare, with the particular quiet authority of someone who has never needed the world's permission to do the work that needed doing. He sat at his desk, opened the first folder, and began. The first directive he signed that week was a national review of civil forfeiture practices on interstate corridors focused specifically on the racial patterns that the Harmon County investigation had documented in such specific and undeniable terms. It carried no celebrity name, no political branding, no press release. It was simply called the Highway Review because it was never about one stop on one highway on one Tuesday afternoon in June. And Raymond Cole knew that better than anyone because he had sat on the gravel and felt the heat of that truth coming up through the ground. 3 envelopes arrived by certified mail in the weeks after sentencing, and the one that reached Loretta Sims came on a Tuesday morning while she was sitting at her kitchen table before her shift, still in her robe, coffee going cold beside her, and she opened it and sat with the check for a long time without moving, not because the number surprised her, though the interest brought it higher than she expected, but because the envelope meant something that money cannot fully carry. and that she had stopped expecting to receive the formal acknowledgement from an institution that had denied her claim and returned her letters and treated her name as a category rather than a person, that she had been wronged, that it had been real, that somebody had finally written it down somewhere. It could not be unstamped. Arthur Webb received his check and kept it on his kitchen table for 6 days before depositing it, just to look at it each morning, the way you look at something you had stopped believing would come. Darnell Price received his and re-enrolled for the spring semester and graduated the following year. And when he walked across that stage, he thought about the $720 and about the summer he had spent earning it, doing landscaping in July heat, and about the look on Briggs's face when he took it. And then he stopped thinking about Briggs entirely, because some things do not deserve the permanent residency of your attention. Reverend Elwood Grant was in his office the morning after sentencing. The old composition notebook on the desk in front of him closed, the spine cracked, and the cover soft from 4 years of handling. 4 years of writing down the names of people the system had decided were not worth the trouble of remembering. He opened the bottom drawer and took out a new one, same kind, same blue pen, same careful handwriting waiting to happen, and he set it beside the old one on the desk with the covers aligned and the edges even, and the two notebooks sitting together the way a finished thing and an unfinished thing sit when they belong to the same long work. He did not open the new one yet. He left it there and looked at it for a while in the morning light coming through the window, the pen resting on top, and then he folded his hands and bowed his head, not in defeat and not in celebration, but in the specific, grounded gratitude of a man who has been doing the right thing for a long time in a place where it seemed to make no difference, and who has finally, on this one morning, been proven wrong about that. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of someone you know, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories where the truth hits harder than fiction.